Armen, you want to go ahead and kick it off?
Absolutely. Well, welcome everyone from the West Coast and the East Coast. Welcome to the AI native compliance webinar, which Spring Labs has kindly put together for all of us. I'll be our panel's moderator. My name is Armen Meyer. I'm co-founder of the American FinTech Council and founder of also my own FinTech advisory firm. And I really enjoyed working with Spring Labs there. And I'm a partner in an AI investment fund called Millennium Capital. We're going to introduce you to the two main acts, our two panel members shortly. But first, Jeff, I think I got to hand it off to you just for a few initial items here from Spring Labs.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Armen, for being here. So a couple of items. This is for informational purposes only. And we were happy that you're here. So, obviously take this advice at your own risk. And housekeeping, yes, this is being recorded. So if you've registered and you're seeing this, then you will receive the recording. Yes, we will also send out the slides if you wished, so request those. And then please use the Q&A function for questions. Chat gets pretty full. And then just make sure to use the Q&A to ask those questions. We will handle it in the moment if it's relevant to what we're talking about at that very moment and we have some time for it. But we want to make sure to get through all the information. So we will have a Q&A section at the end where we'll make sure to handle all the questions that come in. Really quick, there will be a QR code at the bottom as well. So if you're wondering what that is, it's just for a free demo of Zenko and a free ticket to the AI Native Banking and FinTech conference coming up in October. We'll talk more about that later. But Armen, I'll throw it back to you.
All right, well, now for the good stuff, Jeff. Not that you're not the main act, but joining us in this webinar is Derek Higginbotham, the CEO of First Electronic Bank, and John Sun, the CEO of Spring Labs. I see John's slide there. And Jeff and me, of course. John, why don't we start with you introducing yourself, and then we'll go to Derek.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Armen, and appreciate you guys being on the webinar with us, and appreciate everyone kind of listening in remotely here. But I'm John, the co-founder and CEO at Spring Labs. We are a AI technology and AI products company for financial institutions, and my background has been in fintech basically my whole career. So before Spring Labs, I was the co-founder and chief risk officer at Avant, where we were some of the early pioneers in using machine learning technology in consumer underwriting and real-time consumer decisioning. And before that, I'd spent some time with Y Combinator, as well as started my career at Innova, which is a short-term consumer lender based in Chicago.
Derek, take it away.
Derek Higginbotham. I'm the CEO here at First Electronic Bank. My background, I've been a lawyer most of my career. I started at a law firm. Didn't last too long there, and quickly started moving into in-house jobs in various consumer finance companies. So kind of done big public companies and startups in the fintech world. So that all led me to this bank as a general counsel, and then moved into being the CEO about a year later. At the bank, we focus exclusively on fintech partnerships. So every dollar we move is in some kind of joint venture with a fintech. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about the technologies. We spend a lot of time thinking about how to set up the relationships, and a lot of time thinking about how to smooth it all out in this highly regulated environment.
All right, great.
Excellent. Thank you for being
here. Last words, or should I get into it?
Well, I didn't make a headshot and bio slide for myself, even though I made these slides. But I'm Jeff Broger, Director of Marketing at Spring Labs, in case you're wondering.
Exactly. Anyway, so I think, thank you, Jeff. And I think a goal of ours in this discussion is to really break through the hype machine that has kind of surrounded AI, especially since Gen AI has become a household name, and I'm sure we'll all be talking about it at Thanksgiving. So let's focus here on at least one type of real world Gen AI use case. So the bank is actually being implemented today. I think that's kind of the goal here, is to really break through the hype and get the practicality. So John, Derek, maybe kick us off. I was at the Money 2020. I heard about a fateful conversation you guys once had there about a particular Gen AI compliance use case, which I think is essentially the reason we're kind of here today.
Yeah, I think either of us can go. John and some of his staff were out and moving around the Money 2020 floor, and somebody told me I should come and have a drink at the end of the day. And I think that's really where I met John, was having a drink. And he quickly hit me up like, hey, we know what you guys do. Let's talk about ideas of interesting things we could do with AI. And he gave me his background. I'd heard of John before. He's been in fintech for quite a long time. Right at that moment, like we had like been spending a lot of time at the bank thinking about how do we create more analytics. For instance, like a data rich environment, like every kind of data, we ought to be having some analytics spawning off of like all the signals for what's going well and not well in our programs are in there. There have to be ways that we can kind of layer on analytics on it. But there's certain kinds of data that were like really like throwing us off for how could we make really good analytics out of them. And so like, right, he happened to get me on a day where I was thinking about, okay, what we have like all these words coming in from the consumers, with like in the form of complaints or like other consumer inputs that are super hard to structure, like it's super hard to get a lot of information, like metadata tags on them so that we could like create reports off of them. And so we were pretty befuddled with that. But then like thinking about AI, for about 15 seconds after he like sprung this question on me, it seemed like it, if we can just have like the Gen AI reading all those complaints, it's got to be able to start like mapping them and sorting them out for us in the way that we were like struggling to do as just like kind of the human analog version.
Yeah, I distinctly remember that story. I remember some of the details slightly differently. I think Derek might be downplaying kind of his role in the Compliance Assist product here at Spring Labs. If I recall correctly, here's kind of what happened. At the time, we were focused like every other AI fintech company out there on chatbots. For some reason, everyone wants to build chatbots. I was trying to pitch Derek on chatbots. I was like, hey, check out all of this cool chatbot technology that we built. Derek is kind of like, chatbots? He's like, what's actually cool? Complaints management, because that's a real problem that people have. And there's not a million companies out there trying to solve this issue. And I think that was really the genesis of the Compliance Assist product was, this conversation that Derek and I had over, drinks, where we were able to kind of dig into what, some of the challenges and some of the things that will be helpful to a sponsor bank, to a BaaS bank, in managing kind of their complaints, flow was. And I think, we took that back. We came back with, a prototype shortly thereafter, and the rest, as they say, is kind of history. And we've been kind of working together on the product ever since.
I got to say, John, Derek, not only did you have great timing in that meeting, I think you also had great timing this morning. I know you fully planned this. I know this was meant just for this webinar, but I saw an American Banker, not ABA, AB article this morning about what you guys are doing together. So maybe it's worth sharing that, and maybe John or Derek provide a little bit more insight as to what you were talking about with the American Banker, I guess, last week, about how, John, what you're doing, or Derek, what you asked John for, will help. I mean, Derek, you're a sponsor bank. How does this help you do better at the thing regulators are all asking for today, which is we want to see more of a handle on the third-party relationships, more of a handle on banks, fintech vendors?
Yeah, I feel like we all are living this pretty intense call to action right now, and just kind of the way that the interactions happening between the regulatory community and the industry. This fintech movement got really big, and we have a lot of products out there. Not just us, but like the broader fintech movement. I think we've been great at getting market penetration and I think market improvement along the way. And I think we have like regulators saying, okay, like you're all out there now. There's that every loan you make introduces a kind of risk into the system, and you have to make sure you're identifying those risks and managing them really well. I think we are benefiting in lots of ways from like learning how to harness data and like harness the insights that can come from data. And I think like creating product reach, creating efficiencies in customer interactions. And it's also really important for us to figure out how to harness that data to recognize all the problems that can be occurring while we're doing business. So we obviously have to be great at recognizing when problems happen and catching them quickly and doing something about them. And showing that as we're using technologies to kind of get into the market, we also are using those technologies to make sure we manage that market really well. So I think for us, it's just imperative that we are figuring, like, we're catching problems like early and fast and precisely. And I think like this kind of technology, like, it just gives you a great ability to see way more things than you can see. There's just certain kind of insights that are kind of patterns, and to like have enough data in your brain to see the pattern, like, can be kind of hard for the human, just to be looking at enough pieces of information to be like, oh, we see an aberration forming, or we see the patterns diverging, like, and because of that, we know that something needs attention. Like, this kind of technology, like, it has the ability to solve like that human limitation, while still letting the human, like, the thing that the humans are particularly good at, which is like exercising judgment, like still having the human exercise good judgment. So collect the data, sort it out in a better way. The insight gets into the human, and the human can figure out what to do. And more like just the insights are richer and richer. Already, like, from work on this tool, like, we can just see the insights getting richer and richer, so that the human can just actually just do make much more impact with those insights, and doing their kind of part of kind of exercising judgment.
So John, I don't know if that sounds right for what you're doing for Derek. Would love to hear it, but it sounds pretty good. Is that what you guys are doing together right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a major part of the driver of value for a lot of our kind of fintech and sponsor bank compliance teams, is really, like Derek said, around how do we use generative AI's unique abilities around conversational intelligence to take this very unstructured, very rich piece of data that we call a consumer complaint, and turn it into useful, structured data. And that's something that people have been kind of attempting to do with machine learning for many years. And by and behold, we come across kind of this generative AI technology that's much better at understanding semantics, that's much better at understanding language than traditional machine learning techniques. And all of a sudden, overnight, it's possible to kind of do this type of stuff with much easier lift than what we're able to do in kind of this traditional kind of machine learning paradigm. And I think the other piece of it is compliance has perennially been an area that's underinvested from a technology perspective. We've kind of having kind of built fintech products, and having kind of seen my peers kind of build fintech products, it seems like even very tech forward companies don't invest immediately into compliance tech as a first line kind of core part of their business. Because for so long, it's just been kind of easier just to throw bodies at it, and I think, for the first time, we're seeing the power of kind of, technology efficiency gains overcome that, instinct to essentially just solve the problem by throwing more bodies at it. And that's kind of a super exciting, development, and super exciting time.
I think these are actually really interesting problems to solve, but I think it's harder to convince people. Like, I think when you get like developers and technologists, like, they're excited about like some new app, like some new thing that someone's going to see. They're excited about throwing up big numbers. I think you have like CFOs are pretty excited about making sure like their companies are getting like really efficient and saving money. So they'll sometimes incent the technologists to get excited about solving some of those problems. I think like, I don't know if people talk in terms of like actually how interesting a problem some of these like risk management things are to solve. And it was fun working with like John Sun's group, because they kind of grabbed onto it and like played with the ideas, like the guy really got into it. But I think that's like a bit of a challenge that we have, is like getting the technologists who can really do amazing things to want to like to be excited about focusing their problems on some like these risk management areas.
I mean, you guys are putting your finger on something that's a long-standing issue that I think tech like this is beginning to break, which is this idea that compliance and risk management are silos, and they're a thing we get to and they're kind of over there. But I mean, John, I don't know if this has been your experience, or Derek, yours. If you get this right, compliance becomes part of quality control of your customer. It becomes part of your brand. It becomes actually, in a way, a strategic advantage because you can monitor better where you're doing well, where you're not doing well, especially in this consumer complaint context. Has that been a thing you're looking into? Is that something how you see this as well?
Yeah, I mean, we have like a unique kind of business model where like we have different kind of like the way we have different layers of clients. I think clients in terms of like how we set up joint venture partners, and then also the end user clients, and in some ways the regulator, right? Like we have to make sure that everybody's feeling comfortable. So complaints was like a really fun place to start because so many different kinds of problems that like can hurt the company and can hurt your brand and can hurt your customer. Like so many different kinds of things can show up. Like lots of times, I think the thing that you will catch that people will start complaining against is like not bad intent. Nobody tried to write the wrong product. They just like a link got broken when like some code was getting deployed, right? And it happens to be that link is where somebody gets a regulatorily required disclosure, and so that matters to us for regulatory compliance. Also, it mattered to the client because they couldn't find that thing they were looking for. So just like yes, I think to your question, Armen, like this kind of stuff can really impact how good a relationship we have with our customers, our clients, like what our brand looks like, and just all kinds of problems that cause friction in one of the relationships that matters to us a lot can show up in complaints.
And John, have you seen a particular kind of opportunity here emerge across your clients, or a particular inefficiency that's kind of a re-emerging issue where you've been able to help bring a solution that was hard without your technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said earlier was exactly kind of right on the head of the nail. Essentially, you really think about effective kind of customer feedback management and complaints management as kind of two sides of the same coin, right? Essentially, complaints are kind of a window into what the challenges your customers are having with your product are, and whether that's kind of, like Derek said, technological or process or operations. And I think being able to better understand what your customers are trying to tell you is essential, not just the kind of complaints and compliance risk management, but also the kind of just delivering a superior experience to your customers. So to your question about, what are some of the intractable problems kind of in this space? I mean, I think, there are many, right? And it's not just on the compliance side, clearly. I think it's also on the customer service side. It's also on kind of the customer first line contact side. But, focusing more directly on what it is that, we're helping our fintech and sponsor bank clients solve. If you think about the journey of a customer conversation or the anatomy of a customer complaint, what happens is you call up your bank, you're like, hey, I have this issue, I got double charged, or the fee was incorrect, or like a link is broken, and you talk to a first line customer service agent. We kind of call that first line because that's the first point of contact you have with the customer is through your customer service agents. Now, the customer service agents are obviously doing a lot of different things. They're helping customers reset passwords, they're changing information, they're routing the calls to kind of appropriate places. And among one of the many things they have to do is identify when a customer has a real issue, and that needs to be solved. And the challenge, with that interaction is, it's hard to train someone who's doing a lot of different things to recognize very specific particulars about, this might pose some regulatory threat, or there might be an actual kind of claim here that is important to escalate in a particular way. And I think that's one of the ways that AI technology can really help, because it's great at dissecting these conversations and picking out details that sometimes humans might have trouble with, and making sure that it gets done consistently and reliably every time.
So Derek, you must have. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to say, gentlemen, we have a really relevant question that I would actually like to answer now, if y'all are okay with it. So with the CFPB complaints example, I don't understand the way you used Gen AI to process unstructured data. What type of data processing did you perform on this? More generally, how do you determine what type of AI tool to analyze clean, unstructured data to gain insights that you want?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, everyone's looking at me, so I will take that one. It's the answer is there are a lot of different pieces to the process, and it starts with, you know, what problem are you trying to solve with the technology, and I think the choice of technology always comes after what problem are you trying to solve. And in this particular case, if you think about the workflow of a traditional customer service or a compliance team, right? Data comes in, you have to properly identify, is this a complaint or is it a dispute or is it negative feedback or is it a question? So you need to kind of identify the intent of the customer communication as the first step. So we use models for intent detection as a first step, essentially, to kind of help us properly bucket the customer conversation, direct it into the right follow-up models. And then the next step is, let's say it is a complaint. You have to identify what the topics behind that complaint are for better data gathering and tracking purposes. And you also have to identify and use for the regulatory risks or regulatory allegations that might arise as a result of this to help triage that complaint. So we use a set of very specific Gen AI models to help identify those particular risks and to bucket and categorize the conversations. And then lastly, you have to kind of generate a human readable summary of this so that you're able to kind of log it for your own internal purposes, as well as, you know, understand and process or even help generate a remediation and a set of steps to help make the customer happier. And we use kind of more traditional Gen AI, large language model techniques there to help with the generation. So to answer your question, it really is about tailoring the technology to fit the workflow of what it is that you're trying to solve. And in this particular case, it's a combination of small language models, large language models, traditional machine learning clustering techniques that all kind of come together to form this experience that allows the technology to kind of, you know, track a customer communication from kind of start to end.
Awesome.
John, you said a lot there. Oh, go ahead, Derek.
No, I was going to say there's a couple more questions. That was an excellent answer, but we're going to save those other questions for the end and keep going. Go ahead, Armen.
Actually, I think, John, it's worth it's worth pressing you a bit on that, actually, because I think the question begets kind of wants to know more of an understanding about the technology. So here we are all saying the words Gen AI all the time, right? But we've been talking about AI, which I guess now we're calling machine learning, to kind of put that in its box, distinct from Gen AI in the last couple of years, right? What I think people want to know, like, is this hype or are you actually using this new technology that you couldn't have done this before under traditional AI or machine learning, or it would have been hard to do before? But now, because of, as you put it, large language models or small language models, maybe it's worth getting into that, the challenge is more attackable than it was before.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, it's one of the points where, you know, you read some of my, you know, blog articles, I harp on this all the time. I think 90% of the AI implementations out there are hype. Essentially, it's just traditional kind of, you know, processes and traditional machine learning that kind of people slap a Gen AI label or some Gen AI, small thin layer of Gen AI functionality on top. I think how, you know, we think about applying AI, you know, even calls back to the title of the webinar, AI native. We really think that the best solutions need to kind of be developed with kind of this technology kind of in mind. And specifically in this particular context, you know, if you think about what's unique about Gen AI and kind of the latest generation of AI models, it's really this conversational intelligence and semantic understanding piece. Essentially, both large and small language models have embedded in them some understanding of the semantics of languages, of, in this particular case, the English language, right? And if you were to try to do some of these things with traditional machine learning techniques, you essentially have to teach this model like the English language, which is obviously not an easy thing to do. And really what you're getting out of the box with some of these large and small language models is that understanding already embedded, and now you can do things on top of that that you wouldn't be able to do previously with kind of, you know, more traditional machine learning models where you have to build from kind of the ground up. that being said, there's a lot of other interesting non-language use cases for transformer models, which are kind of the underlying, statistical model, the techniques that built these large and kind of small language models. So I think in this particular context, it's all about the language capabilities, but there's a lot of other applications of transformer models outside of that.
So Derek, you
I think
kind of, yeah.
John can speak much more wisely about this, like in the nuanced terms of the different kinds of models. I think where we were at, but for like these kind of tools, is we'd have humans reading everything and then tagging them. And like a thing that we discovered like quickly, or it's a new discovery to me. My COO and compliance officer knew this and told me as at John's group. But when you're like actually having to rely on the data that you're going to run analytics on are just going to be the tags that like the human reads. You're pretty limited in how many tags you can use. And so if our human agents are going to be reading it and they're going to have to label everything, it's like this kind of problem, they can only be like 20 or 25 like labels before people start interpreting them differently enough, and like you actually start getting you don't get good fidelity to the tags, and then like you don't have good data to run analytics on. So like this has been really interesting because we can have way more granular kind of identifiers of like what's going on there than a human agent can. Like with 2025, you have pretty broad buckets, and then like you're within those buckets, you don't have that much like granularity. And so I think like what's feeling like somewhat magic is just like the amount of kind of labels we can get off, like categories that we can get off of out of the data that then the analytics can flow from.
So in a way, you're kind of going back to you're pointing to the ability to gain more insights than just some high-level categories, and you're kind of pointing to the big complaint. I know we had the CFPB database up of the CFPB database because even the consumer advocates, never mind banks, never mind compliance officers, even consumer advocates say these are not helpful. These are too high level. And we're able now to be ahead of the regulator, maybe even teach the regulator, and certainly improve our brand by looking more granularly. And if I'm hearing you right, more consistently, where you don't have to worry about as much error in the categorization as you get more granular. Is that fair what you're saying there?
Yeah, you can get to taking actions that make things better faster, right? If you just know that like you have a bunch of complaints that have to do with fees, like that can be like 100 different things that are in like there's a fee category of complaint. And so I think you just get to the point where you have actionable data much faster.
So Derek, you've canvassed the world, obviously. This is an important thing that you've embarked on. You've picked Spring Labs. It clearly wasn't just because you enjoyed having a drink with John in Las Vegas. Why Spring Labs? I mean, Spring Labs is obviously at a forefront, but as we know, this is a huge space. Everyone wants to be a Gen AI company, but why Spring Labs?
I think two main drivers. One, they actually were just investing enough in terms of people and resources to tackle the problems. I feel like a lot of people have wanted to do it with just kind of with less investment, and there's just a lot. I think a lot's gone into building this thing, and I think you just needed more bodies and more resources to pull it all together. The other part was that these guys have been in fintech world and financial services for a really long time, and they could, as they are building, like they just obviously had a lot of intuition of like, okay, this is where things go wrong. These are how people are moving through their processes. This is kind of these kind of terms that are showing up in complaints, or these kind of terms that are showing up in like the relevant regs. Like they have a lot of meeting, and these guys, and I felt like John's son's group had been like living with those like for the last 15 years. So there's just a lot of it was just really quick to move through building things because there was already intuition and a lot of familiarity with how things work out kind of process wise and kind of relevant themes.
So John, I think you're on first. So like, as the kids say, the proof is in the receipts. So how does the data look? Like what can you tell people about how you're actually making a difference here?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to kind of share some of the, data that we've kind of seen. And the caveat here is this is kind of across a lot of different fintech programs and sponsor banks, not just First Electronic Bank and Derek's, programs. And as a part of building the product, Derek was obviously kind of one of the very first that kind of really leaned in and said like, hey, this would be a really cool product to have. We'd love to kind of participate in getting this thing off the ground. We'd also gotten some other of the major sponsor banks to kind of contribute, their data into the process and help us with their expertise to put this together. All together, I think at one point or another, I think in the building of this product, we touched data from over 100 different fintechs. And here's kind of the high level stats without like naming any names or anything like that we have gathered from the data that we've seen, which is if you think about accuracy in correctly identifying complaints, correctly labeling them, correctly identifying any sort of regulatory risks, and then correctly summarizing the case and the situation as 100% essentially, we're seeing that on average, first line customer service agents and customer support agents are getting it right about 60 to 65% of the time. And then second line compliance analysts are kind of getting it right 70 to 75% of the time. And right now, we're seeing that the AI the compliance assistant AI tool is getting it right about 91% of the time. Again, this isn't representative of every single fintech out there, and there is a pretty wide variance based on kind of how well agents are trained, how well analysts are trained, and that sort of thing. And I think particularly, First Electronic Bank would kind of benchmark higher than the numbers that we're seeing here. But Derek would love to kind of hear like what your experiences with the numbers have been. Are these roughly in line with kind of what you've seen from your programs?
No, I'm going to pat some people on the back. A few of them are listening. I think I'm glad to find out that we were kind of higher than the mean. And so some of this has been confirmatory. Like it's good this is like a good training tool to let people know like these are when you're getting it right and these are when you're getting it wrong. That just having done a kind of our own anecdotal surveys of people that we knew in this space, I think that these kind of numbers are pretty common. And these kind of numbers I think are at when you're not even trying to get that high level of fidelity, when it's like bucketing into like 20 to 25 categories, people are getting it right like this level of time, like let alone if you wanted to give them 50 or 100 categories. So clearly the human agent is pretty limited, and like this is clearly able to get more things. I do think we're a long ways away from just giving up. Like the way we look at this is like champion challenge. Like these two people, the AI person needs to work like next to the human agent, because I think we're still taught like there's still a dialogue between the two to train each other up.
But Derek, has this when you look at this more accuracy, does it mean also that you can address, identify, resolve issues faster? Can you have any examples yet of things you can now do more quickly to improve processes with this information or resolve issues that you couldn't before?
Right now we're so much not focused on this being an efficiency thing. Like this is so much more focused for us on being a more insightful kind of thing. So I probably that somebody got a signal sooner on some of these than they would have otherwise. I'm sure that's happening. What we're watching for is like in our monthly reporting up through like senior management into boards, like we're looking at like, okay, just how quality are the insights that are coming out of this. And that we definitely see like just high quality insights coming out of this.
Got it. And we, John and Derek, you both talked about getting more granular. Have you seen, do you now track more categories than you did before? Like, are you, John, have any new categories kind of emerged more consistently across fintechs? Or Derek, is there a particular new category or two? You mentioned one already that has been really helpful to derive consistently from the Gen AI.
I don't know if I would just say one. I think it's just like we now, instead of like saying, look, we have a spike in things going about calling about, I don't know, like call frequency. Now, like we're hearing like you could hear specific things like over like, this kind of call is happening at this period of time. So I'd say I don't know that one standing out. As I like the last month I looked at the report where our compliance agents are kind of summarizing the most interesting things coming out of complaints. And like for on every page, it was like a very specific thing to that very specific product. With like great data behind it. And every single one, it was a different thing.
Well, since Jeff put this fancy graphic up, John, I think you have to say something about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, granularity obviously is you know a key part of you know dialing in to specific kind of insights. And this is where, you know, what Derek said earlier, I think is something that, you know, totally resonates with kind of what we've seen from a lot of clients across a lot of different kind of, you know, sizes and you know, market verticals. It's really this idea that like there is this inherent trade-off between granularity and accuracy. And with, you know, human processes, that trade-off is pretty stark. Like I can train someone to recognize one of 10 categories pretty accurately. Like if you give them 25 categories, they start to make mistakes. Some of them in their mind are like similar. They look at a case, they're like, well, it could be category 7 or category 17. Like I'm not really sure. If you give them 200 categories, they're going to get it wrong most of the time. But it's precisely kind of at that more granular level when you start to see more insights. Like let's say something very esoteric changed, or there's an issue with some very esoteric thing in your system, right? If you had just kind of said, hey, that's an application issue, it's going to get buried in all of the other application issues. So in order to kind of expose what this underlying issue actually is, you need to get as granular as possible. And it's just simply not possible to kind of do that with kind of human processes.
So you mentioned large language models, John, and you mentioned small language models when we talked about this earlier. And when I'm looking at this compliance dashboard, it makes me think of other areas of compliance. See data privacy, see the things that Derek mentioned earlier that we got to talk to regulators about. So how are you, if you're using and I don't know, so it would be enlightening, I think, to hear your perspective. If you're using a large language model, is information about customers flowing outside of your four corners? And how are you controlling that? Or are you doing something else other than sending information outside of your private cloud or your private systems?
Yeah. So I think, you know, large language models obviously has been getting the lion's share of the attention when it comes to kind of next generation AI, you know, products. When, you know, in fact, I think large language models play a very specific role in product development for Gen AI products, but can't be kind of the end all, you know, be all. And I think you're starting to see that with real data. You know, we're you know, participants in kind of the Gartner ecosystem. We actually were just kind of recognized with a mention in their AI vendors report that, you know, was published very, you know, recently. But one interesting piece of data that Gartner kind of gathered from an accuracy perspective is that using LLMs out of the box for these more generic business kind of use cases generally gets you about a 60 to 70% accuracy rate. And I think with some tuning, you can kind of get it up to the 80% range. It's very difficult to break past that 80% barrier. And that's why, you know, there's this entire class of startups that, you know, people call GPT wrappers, which is basically they use prompt engineering and wrap essentially backend LLM functionality. And at the end of the day, they're very rarely able to kind of pass this kind of wall at this 80% accuracy rate, which for some industries is probably okay. But for financial services is obviously kind of way off of what's, you know, what the bare minimum standard is for, you know, accuracy using these types of tools. So as a part of our process, we try to reduce the reliance on LLMs as much as possible by really structuring the process around, you know, again, the best tool for the job along each step of the way. So to answer your question around security, yes, absolutely. You know, we take security extremely, you know, seriously. You know, we're SOC 2 certified, and we're kind of PCI certified, and all of those things. But in addition to that, we also are just a lot more conscious of what data is actually being put to the LLM. And a lot of the process is done within our data centers and kind of these smaller language models as well as traditional machine learning techniques, such that the data is highly sanitized by the time it even makes its way to the LLM. And in addition to kind of the security aspects of the product as a whole, we're also just controlling kind of what's going into LLMs to make sure that there's no super sensitive data kind of flowing through it.
No, John, it would help. Tell us a little bit more there, I think. So the small language model versus a large language model. So is that your own model that you've kind of derived inputs from the large language models in some way? Is that sitting on your system, that small language model?
Yeah, so small language models generally have much fewer parameters. They're a lot easier to train and fine tune. They're a lot easier to kind of run inference with. So as a result, the hosting requirements for these small language models is much simpler than for a large language model. You don't need to be kind of on a massive kind of GPU instance to run inference using these models. You can do it on technology that's as simple as kind of a laptop or even like as a part of your browser. So as a result, you have a lot more flexibility with what you can do with these, and they tend to be kind of more single purpose, fine-tuned. Again, as I was kind of saying before about our process, we really try to fit the technology to the problem in order to kind of get the best results.
Got it. I think that's pretty interesting. I think Jeff, I think we're at that point in the conversation where you want to chime in.
Yes, absolutely. So for those of you that are interested, Spring Labs has a free demo of Zenko. And if you scan the code that's at the bottom right or go to this link, it'll go to a demo page, sign up for that. And as a special offer, we'll also give you a free ticket to our upcoming AI native banking and fintech conference. It's happening in Salt Lake City, Utah on October 7th. And it's going to be more conversations just like this. So free ticket to the conference, also free access to the recordings after if you book a demo. Plus, in the demo, we actually take 2 months of your complaint data or conversational data. And in a POC, we'll give you a working Zenko dashboard, totally free. You can just reference what your compliance analysts were able to do over the last 2 months compared to our AI, and then decide if it's valuable to you.
Great. I think at this point in conversation, guys, it makes sense. Why don't we spend the next 10, 15 minutes pivoting out of the particular solution? And I think it was good to have an example, so we really get in some technical weeds and some Gen AI versus traditional AI weeds so people understand. But maybe now we pivot out to broader regulatory considerations of using Gen AI or AI more broadly, and kind of how we're all thinking about the future of these kinds of use cases. So Derek, I can't help but come back to you on the topic of regulation, because you're the one implementing this now, and you're the one that has to speak to your regulators about it. You've touched on it. How are you approaching these conversations? How do you recommend others approach these conversations? It might be confidential to provide information, but I have to try. What kind of response are you getting?
Yeah, I think the regulators are speaking publicly about their awareness of people trying to bringing in new modeling techniques and AI into financial services. They obviously have some concern. I think what we're all learning in this fintech movement, and I think this is just going to be another wave of it. If we're going to insert new technologies, like that doesn't get to be fully kind of accepted into the system until like from the top to the bottom, like we know how to do risk management around it. So from the front, kind of the front of the front line of like the fintechs that are doing the consumer interactions up through us and up through the regulators, like every one of us has to know how are the risks presenting themselves and how we're managing it. So I don't think like we'll have like, right, for us, we're not like supplanting human processes or traditional processes around this like for a long time. I think until we not only can show that it's better, but we can show like how we monitor and keep track and do governance around how it's better. I don't think it gets to be fully adopted for us. And I think ultimately the regulators, until they are in a position where they have like their manuals and their examination procedures are written around how to observe the risk management of these kind of technologies, will it be like really fully adopted? So but I think there's there's a degree of like you're guilty till proven innocent. Like I don't think we get to totally consider this stuff like free and ready to rip until we have got it served up in a way that it's auditable and like replicable, and everyone through the system understands how we're doing risk management with it. And that could be like the data protection risk side of it. It's going to be like disparate treatment, fair lending kind of risk side of it, and whatever other kind of risks are going to present themselves.
Now, Derek, spoken like a great CEO understands his regulators and risk management at a bank. I was a bank regulator. I was chief of staff of New York's financial services regulator. And I think the things you're saying, regulators will want to hear. And I think it's fair to say that Gen AI makes what you're saying even more important, because it's particularly scary for regulators, because it's new, they hear it, they worry about it, they don't know what the output's going to be, they don't know how to explain the output, as you alluded to, they don't know if the output will be discriminatory. And this was true for traditional AI, the machine learning. Over the past 10 years, you had fintech led, or 15 years, saying we're using AI to help underwrite. Even that caused tons of regulatory concern, as they were worried about, is someone being denied credit appropriately? Is the credit being offered racially biased in these machine learning non-Gen AI models? And now these concerns are kind of on steroids. So a key, as you put it, is to focus on what can be supervised by humans before the customer is impacted. I almost wonder if you should think of your Gen AI as your junior compliance person or your mid-level compliance person that's reporting up, really.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's how we're using it right now. I think the way I'm thinking about it is that this is another person in the building who's saying, "Hey, compliance officer, you should think about this," or the compliance officer saying, "Hey, I have a sense that there's something over here. I need to dig into it more," and then they can this Gen AI guy can go dig into it.
Yeah. I mean, I laughed when you said the first conversation that you and John had was, John, you mentioned this too, Gen AI bots. And I think like that's not what we're talking about, right? That's speaking directly to customers, and that can lead to a lot of problems. If those are internal facing, great, fits your model, Derek. If you're actually talking to your customers right now directly with unsupervised Gen AI bots, that's probably concerning, right? Because we know Gen AI can hallucinate. We know we're not quite there yet on those direct interactions. Unlike in the traditional models where it's kind of more, rule-based, these Gen AI models expose a little bit more of the hallucination risk. So we in industry, and I don't think, John, it'd be great for your business if all of us in fintech or banking are talking about engaging directly with customers by deploying some of these cases, because that's going to be viewed as more risky, and it's going to kind of squash, I think, some of the great things you just said, Derek, about how we're supervising this. So couldn't agree more that if you're gonna talk about this use case, it has to be supervised. I just want to make one more point. I think what's funny is that there's as much hype about Gen AI regulations as there is about Gen AI itself. I mean, I think people love throwing around the Biden executive order or the California law that's going to change the world that passed 2 weeks ago or whatever it was, and everyone's wondering if Newsom's going to sign, or the EU AI Act from a few months ago. These are the big three. There are others, but these are the ones that seem to come up the most. But what they all address, it's almost the hype we were talking about before, is too high level for us to really have a granular conversation about. They cover the most extreme use cases. It's not really a part of this conversation. Unfortunately, our conversation is not sexy. It is like boring. How do you think about talking to your regulator with respect to Gen AI, given their super broad but boring safety and soundness authority over banks? How do we talk to our regulator about their broad but super boring third-party relationship guidance over bank partners? And of course, Derek, as you alluded to, fair lending law. But I don't think the boringness means we shouldn't be using it. We got to be using the Gen AI. I mean, the IRS, John, this goes back to something you said about others, the government will start using it. I mean, the IRS, I think, disclosed in the GAO report, if you're reading it carefully, and it's using Gen AI in first draft letters to customers. And there's even some evidence that a CFPB is using it to analyze his own complaints, to understand and get the insights you guys are talking about. So I think what you're doing here is like really important, obviously, and you might actually be followed closely or be in parallel with the regulators in some respects.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's fascinating. It's going to be clearly a interesting few years as kind of the technology and the regulations kind of continue to develop kind of side by side and in parallel here. I mean, I'd love to kind of hear from you guys. Derek, where do you think kind of AI is going within kind of the sponsor bank fintech paradigm, and then Armen, like, where do you think AI regulations is kind of going from that same perspective?
Yeah, I think there's going to be more and more adoption. I think it's going to happen like throughout it. I suspect that the regulators are going to be running models very much like these on their databases of complaints, and they're going to have that many more insights coming out, and then they're going to come at the banks and say, well, why didn't you think about this? Like, well, look at this interesting insight. Like, why didn't you catch that? What are you going to do about it? So I think everyone's going to be adopting it. Like, if it lets us get smarter, like, we're going to figure out how to do it. And I think it's going to let us get smarter. I think it'll be in these kind of things where you're actually where you're just scraping all the data for where is there a signal of a problem, so we can go fix that problem. I think that's going to be all over the place, and there'll be the other things too. I think this AI has been, and machine learning has been involved in like the credit decisioning and like credit risk management for a long time. I think we're going to continue to see it in there. I think that the chatbots will be a thing. I think those are going to be a thing. I think it'll be all over where we have kind of the artificial agents working alongside of the traditional agents, and there'll be a communication between the two in probably almost all the functions.
I'd like to address this question that's relevant to this topic. So this came in a while ago. Hopefully the person who asked is still around. Can you provide some examples about how the uses of AI could strengthen and improve the efficiency of the sponsor bank's relationship to fintechs?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fintech and the bank has to be like, we're partners in issue identification and issue management. So I think the better questions we have, like, as we have insights, when we have like, both we have false negatives and false positives. I think there's inefficiency if both sides miss the insight and a problem arises and it gets bigger, and then we got to go clean it up when it's bigger. So like, that's one way it can help. It's also bad, like, when we get when we're if we go to the fintech and say we think there's a thing here and we got it wrong, we have a false positive, like, that creates friction for them, and that's annoying for them, right? If they're having to solve things that were kind of hallucinations of our own. So this, I think, helps us be more precise when we're going to them saying, hey, we think that we need to dig into this. So I mean, so much of the business of like the relationship between a sponsor bank and a fintech is kind of issue identification and issue resolution. And so the better, the more precisely we're identifying the issues, like the better, the easier to resolve them.
Yeah,
John,
makes sense.
On your looking ahead question, I think we'll see a convergence. Well, number one, I think it's on us to demonstrate as much as we can that we don't need the EU AI Act in financial services, that the current legal structure works for what we're doing. And if we're careful as we are being, and as we're using these use cases and we're being communicative, I think that's going to happen. I mean, third-party risk management, fair lending, these all just add in generative AI models to the laws, and the laws will get us a lot of the way there as they currently are. This was a big debate 5 years ago. What do you do with machine learning models? Does fair lending law apply the exact same? And I think a lot of us in the industry wanted the regime we were used to govern, not a new regime. So we were pushing back on new models and saying, let us do well the thing that we've been doing for a long time, give credit to the regulators. The old laws, fair lending laws, accounted for these new tech changes. And I think it's going to be on us to demonstrate that the current laws also account. There will be times where maybe they don't, but I think we want to fit in as much as we can. I think also as we're going forward, you're going to see a convergence of regulation and more use cases like yours, right? I mean, you've already talked about how you can create insights from the complaints. And I think your tech, and you're probably 10 years ahead of me on this, is also going to create insights from not just complaints, but other aspects of customer feedback, which maybe aren't formal complaints, but are complaint-like. See a blog post response, see social media commentary. You're going to be able to use your product to probably eventually go beyond the data set you have to really scour the net and help Derek see even more insights and get ahead of the curve, not just for compliance reasons, but for that quality control, for that brand. And I can't imagine that, UDAP is going to be a big part of this conversation going forward, both from regulators and I think from industry. UDAP, of course, is unfair, deceptive acts and practices. And it's like the most potent enforcement authority by not just the CFPB, which also has this thing called abusive enforcement, but also the Federal Trade Commission, which clearly has jurisdiction over non-bank fintechs, the 50 state attorneys general. I think your tech, and as we emerge as an industry, can really get ahead of the curve on some of the things that we're putting out there to customer communication, such that we're ahead of the regulators and the AGs on things that we might have missed or might have mistakenly said that they might perceive as being unfair or deceptive. And so I think we can see a convergence where we want the regulatory regimes in place because we're going to do better at solving them because operational risk will be reduced by technologies like yours.
Yeah, I mean, that's great perspective. And I wonder if somebody leaked our roadmap to you before the call. No, just kidding. But
wait, say again,
no, I was saying, I wonder if somebody had leaked our roadmap to you before the call here, or set
oh,
that
I'm so
up.
sorry.
But
yeah, that confidence.
No.
I wasn't supposed to read that.
that is actually exactly one of the things we're working on right now, being able to ingest complaints and feedback from forums other than direct and regulatory. So I think that's a very often requested feature. I mean, I would definitely agree with you. I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth within kind of the use cases along, the verticals where we like to focus. But I guess just, some closing thoughts. I'd love to kind of, hear about where you guys think the likely kind of next areas where AI can kind of develop outside of even complaints or compliance would be. I mean, just, Derek, obviously kind of you see a lot of, where the innovation is in the fintech space because you guys work with some of the most innovative kind of fintechs out there. So would love to kind of hear, your perspective on where you think there's applicability. And Armen, I know you as well have great connectivity within this space and have kind of thought about these problems from the regulatory perspective and kind of have seen where there's both development and concern. Would love to kind of hear where you think all this is kind of going.
Derek, you're the banker. I'll throw it to you first.
No, I don't. Bankers aren't paid to be very creative, so I don't know how many more creative ideas I'll have. I think right now we like I said, we've seen it for a while in kind of like the customer evaluation as they're coming in, whether that be like credit underwriting or kind of other fraud underwriting, or kind of identifying out of like what customers you want to go reach out to and in which way. I think we'll keep seeing. So I think there'll keep being development in that. I think like what we're doing right now, just kind of wherever there's a signal that there's something going wrong with the program. And I think there's public data, there's public forums, there's our private forums, there's regulatory forums. And we may be able to come up with some other like forums where like the people are saying things about what their experience is. And then I think also like I think the scariest part that a lot of people are working on this is how do we like have like the AI help us write the customer interaction like on the way out. I think there's something to do. I think this will be hard too to figure out how to actually like set up the paths for kind of like resolving the issues that we identify, and like the part that we've been talking about most of the day. Like they can move through processes where there's more decisions made about how you're going to disposition things and who you're going to communicate them to, and how like downstream from kind of the issue identification. I think there's probably opportunity for that too, like more of the procedures of actually working things through within the bank or between the bank and the fintech. There's probably some opportunities there as well.
Derek, I'll give a quick response only because I think Jeff, you probably have some questions, and we should open it up. So let me just address John's question and send it to you for what the audience is saying here. But we talked about the terror of underwriting, right? But that doesn't mean Gen AI is irrelevant to underwriting. In fact, Gen AI should be a part of it, not in the model, but in the inputs. We can get so many more data inputs structured using a tech like John's to help make underwriting more efficient, especially in small business lending, which is the big nut we have to crack. Everyone says the big banks are only serving the big businesses. So how do you help the smaller banks? You reduce the cost of gathering all those documents, all that information in order to make a smart decision. The decision can't be made by Gen AI anytime soon. It's too risky. I don't even know about machine learning based AI, but the inputting of it, the structuring of content of all the documents coming in that you need to make a decision, or going out to grab more market intel relevant to that industry, could be a huge use case going forward. And Peter Renton's podcast credibly had some thoughtful thoughts on this topic. There's a company in Asia called Getmo, which I advise, which is doing a lot of work in terms of grabbing different kinds of content to help the underwriting model be more efficient. Of course, you need challenger models in fair lending to keep these inputs honest, to keep the model honest, as Derek alluded to, but that's going to be an emerging use case. The other one is just the general idea, right? Like, there are data silos. There's data structured in different ways all over the place, some of it unstructured within your organization, in some random vendor's system, on someone's hard drive, in someone's email. The golden grail here is going to be, can AI grab multiple disparate data sources throughout an org, elevate it up to a structured way, so that when Derek's board has a question, Derek has a real answer without 20 million people digging into different things. It's a validated answer by multiple sources, or the data is reconciled. See also regulatory reporting, same issue. Data silos creating conflicting information by different parts of the org, different vendors. Let's elevate it up, grab it with AI, let's structure it, and let's have a source of truth. I think that could be another use case as we go forward here. And there's a company called BitScout working on that right now at UC Berkeley, which is pretty interesting.
Very cool.
Absolutely. Well, let's open it up for some questions. So if you all have any questions, I did open up a poll, and we got one fun question that says, what is your favorite AI productivity tool? So a little off topic, but if we could do a quick hot take run through your favorite AI productivity tool, I'll kick it off. So I use a lot of AI in my day-to-day, and I would say my favorite AI productivity tool is this one called Motion. It's a AI calendar app. So basically organizes your calendar based on your predetermined settings. And if you give it permission, it won't move meetings, but if a meeting gets booked, it'll move all your other project management stuff around. So pretty cool one. It's called Motion.
I'm not going to have a cool thing to say, although I did take a cool trip to Europe and did have ChatGPT write the itinerary, which was pretty helpful since I'm not much of a planner.
Yeah,
Nice.
I agree. I think ChatGPT is one of the go-tos I actually always use. It's kind of an oldie but a goodie here, But I've tried a lot of random stuff, and I think what gets 95% of usage for me is still ChatGPT.
I left that one for you both.
And I'll be honest, I'm looking around for I like sourcing. I'm kind of a dork, and I haven't loved ChatGPT on the sourcing yet. So I'm still playing with it. I'm playing with a few of the open models to figure out where is the sourcing actually showing me that the AI kind of took the best from multiple sources, and I can kind of see different options as opposed to kind of grabbed one. So anyway, so verdict's still out for me there.
Okay, makes sense. And Derek, I actually have a question for you. So you mentioned recently on a press release that, First Electronic always committed to being early movers with technology in the way that it enhances the consumer experience. And I'm curious, after now working with us on the Zenko Compliance Assist product for many months now, do you believe that the product will enhance the end user experience as well?
Yeah, I'm confident we're seeing things that need attention for the consumer to have a better experience. Like we're already seeing things.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and for me, it always makes sense. Like, yes, there's time savings there, but ultimately that frees up the compliance analyst as well as the customer support representative to give the time to the customer that needs it the most.
Yeah.
Awesome. And let's see here. Any other questions coming through?
John, if I can speak,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff, you have one.
Nope. No, I didn't have one.
I think one of John's responses to this conversation begets like a second question while we have someone who's as technical as him and really knows this. John, if I accidentally gave away your roadmap when I was just pontificating on various potential use cases in the future, how do you think about using the models you currently have and the models that are out there that aren't running on your own systems to do the new use cases? Like, how do you evolve from where you're at now to the future? From a technical perspective, and I guess that involves like, are you now using a different LLM? Are you fine tuning differently?
Yeah, I think this obviously gets pretty technical, but I think part of it is just staying on top of kind of the latest technologies to understand what other folks are working on out there. I mean, that's a big part of any sort of new technology adoption cycle. And obviously, I think what we're experts in is how do we take cutting edge technology and productize it in a way that makes it easy for traditional institutions to adopt and gain ROI from out of the box. And a lot of it is really kind of being at the forefront of like understanding what's being worked on out there, contributing back to kind of the ecosystem in terms of contributing back some of the things that we've been kind of working on and really understand the the capabilities and limitations of the technologies that are kind of out there. And I think we're certainly not the first to kind of invent this hybrid workflow where we're combining traditional machine learning and small language models and large language models to kind of construct products. But I would say we're kind of one of the pioneers in that space, just given the number of companies we're still focused on kind of a pure LLM approach to product development. And I think we're going to learn more about, again, the capabilities and the limitations of the technology as kind of the space evolves.
Amazing. Well,
Awesome.
I think that about does it. So once again, if you haven't already, book your free demo of Zenko today and receive a free ticket to the AI Native Banking and FinTech Conference. It's going to be great. Derek and Armen will be there. It's the first ever AI Native Banking and FinTech Conference, and we're going to have a lot of talks just like this, many topics. If you can't make it in person to Salt Lake City, Utah on October 7th, that's okay. We are recording all the sessions. And just by booking your free demo today of Zenko, you'll get all of the recordings, which is going to be dozens and dozens of panelists, speaker tracks, regulators, AI companies, innovators, sponsor banks, fintechs. We're all getting in the same room. We're going to have many discussions just like this. So thank you so much for attending. And I did also drop the link in the chat if you're having trouble with the QR code.
So, well, Derek and Armen, thank you guys so much for joining us on the webinar here. And yeah, excited to see you guys in Salt Lake in about a month here.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Great conversation.